The title of this story might be confusing to some people, as the subheading descriptor of The Man Without Fear is often associated with Daredevil, not the Black Panther. So how exactly did we get here? Well, it all started with a little Daredevil storyline called Shadowland.
Matt Murdock returned to New York City after accepting a role as leader of the ninja organization known as the Hand. Murdock intended to utilize the group of assassins for peaceful purposes and clean up the streets of Hell's Kitchen. However, Murdock was slowly corrupted by a combination of power and the slow possession by the demonic force that founded the Hand, known as the Beast. Daredevil even went as far as to kill longtime nemesis Bullseye, and Murdock's power grab drove Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, out of power and underground. Several street-level heroes, including Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Moon Knight, and Spider-Man, attempted to confront Murdock, but it was finally Foggy Nelson who got through to Matt and convinced him to sacrifice himself to purge the beast from his soul, with Murdock later being resurrected by Elektra. Matt Murdock then left New York City in an attempt to reclaim his lost soul. Weeks later, Luke Cage and Iron Fist were confronted by none other than the Black Panther, who proclaimed that he was the new protector of Hell's Kitchen.
Now, this wasn't entirely unprecedented, as Daredevil had actually encountered the Black Panther on a few occasions during the early 70s while in San Francisco. But why is T'Challa here now? Doesn't he have a country to run? Well...
During the Secret Invasion crossover event, Wakanda's military forces were depleted, fending off the invading Skrulls. This led the African nation right for another invasion, this time led by the forces of Latveria and Dr. Doom. Knowing that Wakanda's most valuable asset was the mineral deposits of vibranium, T'Challa performed a mystic ritual rendering all Wakandan vibranium inert. Afterwards, T'Challa ceded the mantle of the Black Panther and the powers associated with it to his sister Shuri.
I should point out that T'Challa and Shuri are much closer together in age than they are in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Also, yes, I am aware that I'm skipping over another major plot point, but we'll touch on that a little bit later. For now, let's look at Black Panther's efforts to fill in for Matthew Murdock. This is Black Panther, The Man Without Fear, Volume 1, Urban Jungle.
Matt Murdock talks with T'Challa about how the recent actions continue to haunt them despite having the best intentions. Matt offers the former king a chance to be the guardian of Hell's Kitchen while he is away. T'Challa is willing but doesn't want to attract attention, so he'll need a new identity. Matt assures him that that's not going to be a problem. Murdock has Foggy Nelson scrounge up enough documentation to give T'Challa the guise of a Congolese immigrant named Okonkwo. T'Challa thanks Nelson by swearing secrecy and vowing not to contact him again lest the lawyer get disbarred. Okonkwo soon gets a job as manager at a diner known as Devil's Kitchen, where he feels he can keep his finger on the pulse of the community. He even hires a former Serbian nationalist looking to go straight named Sofia. Okonkwo has even rented an apartment where he befriends a few neighbors like the Thai family known as the Nantakarns. Mr. Nantakarn is looking to help his son fend off bullies by teaching him Muay Thai. Really though, T'Challa still misses his homeland of Wakanda and his wife, Ororo.
Yeah, so around this time, Marvel had a much publicized storyline in which it was revealed that T'Challa and Ororo Munroe, aka Storm of the X-Men, had fallen in love and would eventually get married, with the revelation being that they had once been teen sweethearts while he was on walkabout and she was still a thief. Naturally, after this much ballyhooed wedding, they immediately set about trying to break the two up, and while the two are still technically married at this point, the marriage would eventually get annulled for... I have no idea why.
Meanwhile, a Romanian mobster named Vlad Dinu begins implementing his plan to take over for the Kingpin during Fisk's absence. He works with his eldest son Nikolai to get the word out about his intentions by pointing out his past as part of a Romanian super soldier project that gave him the ability to channel kinetic energy into solid objects. Taking inspiration from a more well-known Romanian named Vlad, the Impaler is now set to be a force in the organized crime world. 3 weeks later, T'Challa is ready for his first patrol, donning a new Panther costume with an urban soldier flair to it. Word about Vlad has gotten out, and the Panther is going after the Impaler's underlings to ferret the mafioso out. He manages to track down the location of a deal being brokered by Nikolai, but in reality, this is a trap to try to catch the Panther. The group proves no match, and Nikolai doesn't have his father's abilities. However, things are not all well, as T'Challa soon returns to find that Mr. Nantakarn has been killed in what appears to be a professional hit that has Vlad's fingerprints all over it. 3 weeks later, and Nikolai has set another trap to try to lure the Panther. T'Challa is hip to it, though, and patiently waits until the mobsters are on break to then drain the tasers they had intended to use on the Panther. He then dangles Nikolai over a ledge and demands better information, or next time, the ledge will be a little bit higher. However, Vlad has also been working hard and managed to track the Panther's whereabouts to the Devil's Kitchen diner. He and Nikolai decide to stage a robbery at a nearby bank in hopes that it'll draw out a quick response. And if it doesn't, well, they'll just steal from the bank anyway. Meanwhile, T'Challa returns to his apartment building to the news of another killing. This is the fifth of its kind, and he's starting to suspect that everything is a little off. All of the victims were parents, and this doesn't match Vlad's usual modus operandi. He talks briefly with Iris, a neighbor and social worker who's been looking after the Nantakarn boy named Alec before the state officially takes him in. Iris then reveals a hard truth that the call center she works at got reports that Mr. Nantakarn was not actually teaching Alec Muay Thai, but rather using him as a training dummy. She then notices the bruises on Okonkwo's body and offers a sympathetic ear or more if he should need it.
Still married. I mean, I know T'Challa's trying to lay low and not really attract much attention to himself, but, dude, you could easily shoot this down with just one statement. Just say, I'm married, my wife is still in the Congo, and I'm trying to earn enough money to bring her to America. It's not really that hard.
Okonkwo then heads to work where Sophia and Brian, another employee, inform him that there's someone waiting in his office. Okonkwo goes in expecting to see Vlad, only to be greeted by none other than Luke Cage.
Around this time, Luke Cage actually became the leader of the New Avengers and featured a new lineup consisting of the likes of Spider-Man, Iron Fist, Mockingbird, Ms. Marvel, Carol Danvers, Jessica Jones, as well as a few others. This took place after the events where they removed Norman Osborn as Secretary of Defense, which is a position he had gained in the wake of the Secret Invasion storyline.
Cage offers the assistance of the Avengers should the Black Panther require it. However, T'Challa points out the people of Hell's Kitchen don't need a major superhero battle, as it would cause too much collateral damage. Cage points out that even Daredevil knew when to ask for help, and that T'Challa may have bit off too much that he can chew. Later, as the diner closes for the night, Vlad puts his plan into motion as he hires a group of lackeys to trigger a silent alarm which brings the police. Vlad then kills one of the lackeys to provide a distraction for escape. In the confusion, Vlad takes Sophia and Brian hostage, which catches the Panther's attention. This leads to a rooftop battle where T'Challa notices that Vlad's powers aren't limitless and they can be drained. However, before he can do anything, Brian and Sophia get knocked off a roof. The Panther manages to catch Sophia, but Brian winds up crashing to the pavement below. T'Challa looks down from the rooftop with his mask torn and he sees Sophia looking back at him. She appears to have discerned his identity and tells the Panther to go after Vlad. T'Challa manages to confront Vlad again, pointing out that the Impaler could never be like the Kingpin, as Fisk always made sure to cover up any connections to his actions. Vlad, on the other hand, just killed a bunch of people in front of dozens of witnesses. T'Challa goads Vlad into depleting more of his powers and then tries to drop him with a couple of bricks. The Impaler has one last trick up his sleeve though and uses some exposed wire to charge up one final attack and escape. When he comes to, T'Challa rushes to the hospital where Sophia tells him that what he does is not her business and she knows that he does care for Brian. The two are then informed by Dr. Holman of Brian's death and Okonkwo smashes a soda machine as he exits the hospital. Luke Cage is waiting outside, willing to offer more help, but once again, T'Challa tells him to stay away. T'Challa does his best to regroup and begins stocking up on supplies to build some gadgets that will hopefully neutralize Vlad's abilities. When he returns to his apartment, Iris is waiting there. She's heard about the diner and offers support, as he again politely turns her down.
At least this time it came across as being less flirtatious.
Things aren't going so well for Vlad either, as his wife Angela is troubled by something. She mentions receiving a disturbing phone call as Vlad prepares to leave and take their youngest son, Gabe, to school. After the group leaves, Angela hits the liquor cabinet and then receives a knock at the door that she's been expecting. After dropping Gabe off at school, Nikolai talks with Vlad about the next plan. He has an idea, but Vlad shuts him down. Nikolai has mucked up too much to contribute any more to dealing with the Panther. So Nikolai is forced to go over his father's head and visits the hospital where he meets with Dr. Holman, the same person who worked on Brian earlier. In reality, Brian is alive, though in a catatonic state, having somehow absorbed some of Vlad's energy. The doctor has synthesized a serum from Brian's blood to possibly bestow Vlad's abilities onto Nikolai. Elsewhere, T'Challa begins employing his new toys as he uses a homebrew surveillance computer to measure energy spikes in the area and tracks down what he believes to be Vlad's home. He then takes down some guards outside the residence and enters in through the top floor window to find Angela Dinu's dead body. The commotion brings Vlad into the room and he immediately jumps to conclusions and begins attacking the Panther. T'Challa manages to temporarily neutralize Vlad's powers and tries to explain that he didn't kill Angela. Vlad, however, gets another lick in just as Spider-Man enters the building. Spidey and Panther shove Vlad down a flight of stairs just as the police enter, which allows for the heroes to escape. Knowing that Luke Cage probably sent Spider-Man, T'Challa is not very pleased, but Spider-Man points out this has probably gotten too big for one person to take on, and again, Daredevil would have realized that. T'Challa tells Spidey to just leave him alone and leaves. The police don't consider Vlad to be a suspect in his wife's death and let him go. Later at the funeral, Gabe yells at his father for lying about the family's safety. At the same time, services are held for Brian, with only Mr. Okonkwo, Sophia, and Brian's uncaring uncle attending. Later, the Panther pays a visit to the detective on the case, Kurtz. Kurtz won't talk, but it isn't necessary, as T'Challa is just using the conversation to covertly copy all the files on the cop's computer. As this is happening, Vlad is being taken to task by the remnants of the Kingpin's empire. They tell him to lay low on the Panther, as it's causing too much of a distraction. He responds by blowing them all up. Unbeknownst to him, though, he's actually being tracked by the Panther and Spider-Man, who insisted he'd come along. T'Challa is waiting for the right moment to strike. Still, T'Challa must return to his day job, where he sees Iris and Sophia talking. Iris relates a story of her history of an abuse victim, while mentioning that the hotline she worked for had gotten a call about the situation at Dinu residence before leaving to investigate another report, this one about a special needs child. Meanwhile, Nikolai and Gabe stop off at the hospital to check on Brian. Dr. Holman says that he's made quite a bit of progress after a minor lobotomy. Brian demonstrates his new power by causing a spike to rise out of the ground and impale a dog.
Boo!
However, the use of Brian's powers causes a brief blackout, and when the lights come up, Brian, the serum, and Gabe are missing. Gabe is behind the vanishing and explains why to Brian as they take cover in an alley. Gabe lifts off his shirt to show a set of scars. His mother knew where to hit so they wouldn't be visible. He and Nantakarn would share abuse horror stories on the playground. Gabe made the call to the abuse hotline, but he didn't want his mother dead just for the abuse to stop. Fearing that when word of this gets to his father, he's a goner, Gabe injects himself with the serum. While this is going on, T'Challa goes through the files on Kurt's computer. He then notices that both the Dinu and Nantakarn residents called the abuse hotline. In fact, all of the murder victims had called the abuse hotline. Added to that is the fact that Iris was the one dispatched to investigate many of these calls, and T'Challa has realized the truth. Iris is the one who killed Mr. Nantakarn, Angela Dinu, and now the two parents she had visited earlier. T'Challa sets up outside the apartment building and begins waiting for Iris to return. Unfortunately, he's called away by Sophia due to some Romanian customers appearing at the restaurant. He tips off Detective Kurtz about Iris and decides to go after Vlad instead. It turns out the diners were bookkeepers for the crime family, and when confronted, a large one, who I presumably was ironically named Tiny, attempts to defy the Panther. Though this changes after a beating, and T'Challa is now in possession of several tax documents for the feds to bring down Vlad. Meanwhile, Kurt's visit with Vlad about Iris. The mobster is in denial about any calls to the abuse hotline, not knowing that Gabe is actually looking on from the shadows. As the detective leaves, he points out that Vlad's bookkeepers got hit earlier, and Vlad ignores this to return to stewing over the Panther, believing that Iris is now in his employ. Though he still lashes out at Nikolai over, well, pretty much everything at this point. Vlad leaves Nikolai with the task of finding Gabe. Instead, Nikolai sets out to kill Iris and the Panther. Meanwhile, Gabe swipes Kurtz's file on the case and takes it back to Brian. He doesn't want vengeance, only more assistance. As this is happening, the Panther hands Vlad's files over to Kurtz as he raids Iris's apartment. However, one of the cops has loose lips and calls the Avengers. It's around this time that Iris returns home and spots the police outside the building. She tries to flee without detection, but the Panther catches her. Iris defends her actions by pointing out that while the Panther goes after the flashy mobsters and the Avengers take on supervillains, cases like hers just slip through the cracks, and she is doing for abuse victims what heroes do for everyone else. The police and Luke Cage arrive, with Cage trying to talk the Panther down. Once more, Gabe looks on from the shadows as the two heroes begin arguing.
I would say they were African-American superheroes, but obviously T'Challa is just African, he's not American, unless his forged green card counts as American citizenship.
Gabe tries tapping into his serum-induced powers and manages to telekinetically shove Cage into the Panther. Iris runs off as the two heroes begin fighting. Knowing he's not going to be able to outpunch a guy with unbreakable skin, T'Challa tries utilizing a nerve pinch to immobilize Cage. Gabe then manages to pull Iris to safety, offering to help her in exchange for more assistance. He manages to trip the Panther up as Iris accepts. As they run off, Gabe explains that she'll now have to kill Vlad. The next morning, Okonkwo comes in for work, only for him and Sophia to get jumped by Nikolai. However, this in turn gets interrupted by Vlad, who's discerned the Panther's identity. Vlad begins generating an energy bomb as Nikolai tries to claim the kill. This causes the bomb to go off prematurely and the diner explodes.
You know, T'Challa was just the manager of the diner. He didn't own it, so I'm guessing he and Sophia are now out of a job.
Okonkwo works on trying to get innocents to safety as Nikolai is thrown and pinned under a beam. Vlad then chooses to abandon his son and impales him for being such a disappointment. He then runs off as the authorities arrive. Luke Cage makes a last-minute save to rescue Okonkwo and Sophia. Luke and T'Challa then make peace as Cage admits that his wife Jessica Jones took him to task over the previous fight. T'Challa promises to accept help next time he needs it, but still this time he must take on Vlad alone, and this is a decision that Luke respects. T'Challa suits up and manages to trap Vlad in an energy-dampening snare. But Vlad has a trick up his sleeve and uses what little power he has to manage to escape. However, he depletes his reserves in the process. Before a final blow can be delivered, Gabe and Iris emerge. Iris draws her gun, but Gabe turns on her and encases her in some type of molten rock. He then does the same to the Panther. Pleased, Vlad prepares to leave with Gabe, only for the Panther to make one last effort as the police arrive. He breaks free and ensnares Gabe in another energy dampener. He then manages to land a knockout punch on Vlad, whose power reserves are completely depleted. As Iris tries another escape, Sophia manages to take her down. Afterwards, Gabe admits where he got his new powers from and admits Brian's location as well as his new powers. Gabe figures that soon Brian will come looking for his friends. T'Challa then sets out to locate Brian, but he isn't the only one, as Dr. Holman wants her experiment back so it can't be traced to her. She knows just the perfect hunter for the job.
Yeah, if you remember my Kraven's Last Hunt review, I mentioned there that the character was eventually resurrected from the dead in a storyline from Amazing Spider-Man. Anyway, that concludes our look at Black Panther, The Man Without Fear, Urban Jungle. How was it? Well, on the plus side, I did kind of like a lot of the characterization in the story. I did like that it felt very kind of street level and basic. It wasn't too overly dramatic and overly action-packed, you know, in a sort of grand spectacle type of manner. It was a good, like I said, good street level, small story with some nice pacing throughout it. There's not really a lot of points that bog anything down, and it's all coupled with some really good artwork from Francesco Francavilla. If there is a drawback, it's that I find the villains to be really underwhelming. Vlad is interesting for a little bit, but, you know, his characterization is just kind of a little off a bit. I don't like they gave him the Boris Badenov speak, the I am doing good, yes type voice. It really comes across as very cringy, and the way he's very judgmental over both of his sons is, like I said, also just kind of cringy. And Iris does provide a nice twist in the story, but I think it would have been better if, say, that had actually been padded out to maybe the second story arc. I mean, I think that would have helped to maybe add a bit more gravitas to the actions. It just, again, it kind of comes across as a little thin at times, for lack of a better term. And I'll say this last bit's a little nitpicky, I know, but still. T'Challa is supposedly not supposed to be drawing attention to himself, but I mean, he's running around in a panther-shaped outfit that happens to be black. I mean, someone's going to make the connection eventually, you'd think, right? Still, not to mention, I would say I don't feel this story isn't entirely bad. Like I said, there's a lot of enjoyable bits to it, but it's not that good either, and I don't feel real comfortable recommending it to a new reader as a good jumping-on point. Especially if you weren't entirely familiar with Shadowland or the events of Black Panther leading into it. So I'm going to be giving Black Panther, The Man Without Fear, Urban Jungle, a C. And with that, let's see what we'll be doing next time on the Random Trade Review.
Remember, you can help support my channel at patreon.com/sleepytimeforcatproductions. There, you can request a trade to be put in the randomizer, aka the cardboard box. Also, remember, like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring that notification bell.